And so begins our lecture today, ladies and gentlemen. Put your hands together in your head, please, for Nic Anderson.
Is everything, can everybody see this in full size, full screen?
We see black. We see that we are recording Zoom, and we see your desert background. I think you're projecting the wrong screen.
Yep, I am. Let me switch from that to this. Back to here. Is that better?
Yeah, now we see the corner. It's called position. Okay, now we see most of it. Now we see all of it. This is going to be awesome.
Okay,
as
the
before,
camera's here.
ladies and gentlemen, because I have to tell my video guy, like, at what, go to, minute 10, 11,
Gotcha.
This is when we start. So all that nice thing I said before about Nic Anderson, that's all on the cutting room floor because of your technological error. Let's start over.
Do it again. I want to hear it all over again.
You want me to do the whole bat?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, all I can say is that everyone I talk to loves Nic Anderson. Nic Anderson this, Nic Anderson that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to call him my friend. Put your hands together mentally for Nic Anderson.
Thank you, Joe. So this is a topic I very rarely get into this type of stuff with MDG or with clients. I don't know if this is master's degree health economics, if this is PhD, or if this is associate's degree. I don't know where it is. But I think it's really informative. I mean, whether you're in manufacturing or you're in medical device sales or you're a CFO of a hospital, I think that this topic would be very informative, very useful. How do physicians actually get paid? And there may be a cartoonish idea that when a physician bills this CPT code, CPT codes are for procedures. They're not for the device. They're not for the hospital stay or any of that. It's just the procedure. That there's an attached a number of dollars that comes with that CPT code. So you bill CPT code 12345, and then you go look up on this sheet and you say, oh, I'm going to get reimbursed $42. That it's much more complicated than that. And I'm purposely getting into the weeds on this to really show how complicated it is. And then I'll get into some broader economic ramifications of how physicians get paid and maybe try to read the tea leaves just a little bit. There's the equation for how a physician gets paid. And within each of these, and I purposely kept the font small, within each of those words is another equation. So let me just read it. Payment equals work relative value units plus practice expense relative value units plus malpractice relative value units plus times work geographic practice cost index plus the practice expense geographic practice cost index plus the malpractice geographic cost index, all multiplied by the conversion factor last year, multiplied by the medical economic index, multiplied by the updated adjustment factor, times legislative change times budget neutrality. That's how a physician payment is determined. And like I said, inside each one of these, like this UAF right here, there's another equation. And I bet within that equation, there's another equation. So if I were to really write out, how is a physician payment for a tonsillectomy, how is that price, $200, $900, $22? How is that number derived? Well, this, believe it or not, is the simplified version. So even more simplified is that. So this gibberish at the top, I've simplified as follows. Payment equals relative value units multiplied by something called the geographic practice cost index times the conversion factor. So over the next half hour, we're going to dive into what each of these three things are. Each of those three things is meaningful, and it determines how much a doctor is going to make this year and next year.
I thought for sure that you were going to put, this is what it really looks like in white and show all of the factors.
No, I wish I could. I would actually, believe it or not, I would be interested in going and diving into each and every single one of these tiny little things. I actually noticed I left out the word practice right here. Malpractice geographic practice cost index. I mean, Joe, it could probably go on for 10 pages. Just showing
I was, as your marketing friend, I would say, when you hire me, this is what I'm thinking through. And it'd be like, oh my God, I need to hire a health economist. Holy crap. I thought this was easy.
No, and I'll I'll stop you there really quickly. And maybe I'm doing 16 people on this call a little bit of a disservice in the sense that what I'm going to talk about this morning isn't really actionable. It's not something everybody on this call is going to take away and go, wow, I'm going to go change my company, like how I normally talk about doing clinical trials and creating a value dossier to show to insurance companies that your technology is worth reimbursing. That lecture, Joe, is actionable. And I hope everybody leaves that room and goes, wow, I got to go raise $5 million because I got to go do a clinical trial because I'm scared Aetna is going to deny coverage for my technology. Today's lecture is, I don't know if it's esoteric, I don't know the correct word, other than interesting. And you may be able to derive some meaning out of this and say, wow, given what Nic talked about on September 9th, I am going to go change this or that. But today's lecture is interesting. It shows another degree of complexity of healthcare. I don't know that it's going to help you change how you run your medical device company. It may help Boston Scientific. If I could go have a meeting with Mike Mahoney, I think this would change how Boston Scientific runs. If I could go have a meeting with the CEO of Myriad Genetics, I think this could change how Myriad Genetics runs their company. But on the individual startup level, I don't know. Let me go through it and then you tell me if it would change how you'd run your
I'm
company.
thinking that why aren't you in a meeting with Mike Mahoney? I get it. It's a big company as a CEO. Still, you're Nic fucking Anderson.
Yeah, I need to put that on my signature.
No, that would not be appropriate with your brand. I can say that.
No, so my boss's boss's boss is Mike Mahoney. So I could, probably get into his office relatively easily, but let me show you this. Like I said, we're going to take each one of these at a time, RVUs, gypsies, and CF.
Okay,
So
and we chose
RV,
red so that we could not read it on purpose?
Joe, criticize me later.
No, I'm saying, I'm wondering if you were doing that so that we would not focus on that which is written in red.
No, you're supposed to be able to see it.
Okay.
So RVUs is unitless. There's no dollars assigned to this. It's just a measure of how difficult and what is required to do a CPT procedure. It's divided up by work, practice expense, and malpractice. So I'll get into that in just a minute. The next one is the gypsy. This takes into account the cost of running a practice in different locations, and it's also divided up by work, practice expense, and malpractice. And the last one is the conversion factor. This is the dollar amount that's released by CMS every year that adds dollars to RVUs times gypsies. So notice in this equation, this is valueless, excuse me, this is unitless, this is United States dollars. Because of course the physician's going to get paid in United States dollars. There's got to be a dollar sign in a V3 unit inside the equation. So let's take these one at a time. Top, I'm going to show you kind of where we are in the lecture. We're going to just talk about RVUs for a minute.
Nic,
Joe, if you remember,
up.
whatever, 6 months ago.
You're breaking up a little bit, and I'm afraid that your topic is complex enough that losing a few words will completely make it gibberish. You want to take a moment and mute yourself and dial in so we have you on cell?
Yeah, I can do that.
And if you want to talk a bit about this as you do, or we can entertain ourselves with something else in the meanwhile, that's fine too.
Let me do this. I'll call in right now, and then I'll mute myself.
All right. I have been trying to take the temperature of the few people in Great Britain with whom I've personally spoken in the last 24 hours to see how's the country and what should I expect. And, I've had as many points of view as people with whom I've spoken. I suppose that shouldn't be terribly surprising. Everyone had a personal relationship with this person that they'd never met, but had been around as long as they had been alive, as long as they could recall. That's
I saw a stat yesterday that 90% of the people in the world have been born after she became queen.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. That
So
won't happen again, most likely. They won't let you in?
Should I just muscle through it? And if I cut out, you stop me and tell me to wait just 10 seconds while it recoups?
I guess. Yep.
Okay. Sorry for that.
It's all good.
So let's take each of these. Up at the top, you can kind of see that arrow pointing at RVUs. This is where we are as we go through each of these things that determines physician payment. Every CPT code has an associated number of RVUs. I'm assuming everybody knows what a CPT code is. It's what a physician bills for having done a tonsillectomy or having done an ingrown toenail removal or whatever the procedure is. It's
Nick, I have another idea. I'm going to phone you, and I'm going to
Okay.
let your voice from here carry into the program.
Okay.
And you want to mute your computer.
There we go. Okay.
Is that better, folks? Go ahead, Nikki.
Is that better?
I think so.
I'll keep this on so I can hear you.
Yep.
Oh, I can hear myself.
Is that bad?
Yeah, I'm going to hear myself as I talk.
All right, I've hung up. Once again, let's try to do it the old way. Now you're on mute.
Let's take each of these one at a time.
Thank
So
you.
there's physician work RVUs. Physician work is exactly what it sounds like. How difficult is it to do a tonsillectomy? So there's going to be a certain number of valueless units, I should say unitless values that are here in physician RVUs. And it's going to take into account technical skill, physical effort, really how difficult is it to do that particular procedure. The next one is practice expense RVUs. So when you do a tonsillectomy, you got to have a practice. You got to have clinical staff, you got to have materials, you got to have time that certain equipment is in use, and then you have indirect costs like rent and utilities and overhead. There's going to be a certain number of RVUs attached to that. And then malpractice is exactly what it sounds like. Interesting, malpractice RVUs are benchmarked off of psychiatry. So whatever malpractice is for psychiatry, if you're doing a tonsillectomy and there's a higher chance you're going to get sued or you're going to screw up, the RVUs are going to increase versus psychiatry. If there was anything lower, then you'd go lower than that, but there's not because that's the lowest one. Those RVUs plus those RVUs plus those RVUs is the total number of relative value units a physician's going to get for doing a certain procedure. Okay, now let's go down here to conversion factor. Let's leave RVUs for just a minute. It'll be more clear as we go forward. The next one is conversion factor. So here's the mess of an equation that is conversion factor. Let me go back. This year, conversion for this year is in US dollars. It's in US dollars every single year. Because remember, if RVUs are unitless and divvies are unitless, the conversion factor must have US dollars in it. Otherwise, how's the doctor going to get paid in US dollars? Well, this is it. So the conversion factor this year is equal to the conversion factor last year times these things. So let me show you what those things are. You have the medical economic index, which is a calculation of the inflation rate for medical services, which is generally higher than the inflation rate in the CPI. The UAF, let me read this, and forgive me for reading it. It's terrible when people read things on slides, but I just want to show you how important macro type economic things are for this. This puts the sustainable growth rate that takes into account growth or decline in GDP, gross domestic product, change in number of Medicare beneficiaries, regulatory adjustments that may affect the demand for and cost of providing Medicare services. This is the mechanism through which relative portion of Part B Medicare, which is principally outpatient care, physician office stuff, is maintained at an acceptable with respect to overall spending, size of the economy as a whole. So you don't have to raise your hand, but raise your hand if you knew that GDP and the number of Medicare beneficiaries coming onto or coming off of Medicare played a role in how much a doctor gets paid for removing an ingrown toenail. I mean, that's funny. I mean, that's macro economics that you would see on Bloomberg or CNN, CNBC, any of these things, that has a real life effect on how Dr. Smith gets paid at the end of the day for removing an ingrown toenail. The next one is legislative change. This is essentially Congress stepping in and putting in a little extra money into the Medicare pool of money. So legislative change, that one right there. Let's say it's the number one right now. And let's say Medicare steps in and wants to, or the United States Congress steps in and says, we need to put an extra $1 billion into Medicare this year because of the pandemic or because of this or that. Well, it would go from a number one to maybe 1.01. So this number would go up. And then the last one is the bane of everyone's existence, and it's called budget neutrality. As a taxpayer, you're happy that there's budget neutrality. As a medical device executive, you're upset by it, because this means if Medicare increases payment for mammograms, they have to decrease payment for childbirthing services. If they giveth here, they taketh from here.
But need they take it from the same category? Can't
No.
they take it from civil engineers?
No, they will take it from the Medicare program budget, but they have to take, it won't necessarily be a procedure. It could be somewhere else. It could be changing, I think, don't quote me on this. It could be changing how much they pay in RVUs, or how many RVUs are allowed in the practice expense. So maybe, I don't want to go back to the previous slide, but the practice expense RVUs for a tonsillectomy, let's say it's 1.2, and that's an increase from last year. Well, maybe they decrease it back to 0.98. Maybe they just say, guys, we have to pay more for mammograms, so we're going to pay fewer practice expense RVUs overall for every procedure in the United States. And then you go, well, that doesn't really help unless you're in the mammogram business, and you go, sweet, everyone else is getting a cut where I get a little perk for doing mammograms because I'm Philips or Toshiba.
To be clear then, why is it outside the rules of budget neutrality to say more money for healthcare, less for maintenance of roads and bridges?
So that would be legislative change, not budget neutrality. So legislative change would be Congress coming in and saying, we were going to spend $1 trillion on roads and bridges. Now we're going to spend 800 billion, and we're going to give an extra 200 billion to Medicare. That would be LC, not BN.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, you bet. So here, now we're going to get out of those weeds a little bit. And here's what this looks like. There's a conversion factor for the last 9 years. In 2015, conversion factor, which again is the conversion factor for 2015, was the conversion factor for 2014 times all of these things. In 2015, one RVU paid $35.7547. And then it went up a little bit in 2016, and then whatever, it went up a tiny bit in 2017, and so on. Now, this is 8-year because I added 2023. This is the proposed payment rate for 2023. Medicare just released it a little bit ago. So from 2022 to 2015, the price of an RVU has been cut by 3.2%. Over the last 5 years, 3.9, and over the last 4 years, 4.1 cut. So you go, these are tiny numbers. I mean, between 2019 and 2020, an RVU only changed by 5 cents. Like, that's a tiny 5 pennies. Like, this is nothing. Well, when you look at a percentage basis, it's a big deal. Now look at this, a cut of 4.42%, or $1.53 per relative unit to 23. So that's all 50 cut right there. Again, you go, Nick, $1.53. I mean, that's like a cup of coffee. That's not a big deal. So a 4.2% cut. Now watch, I'll show you why that is a big deal. So let's go here to gypsies. We haven't talked about gypsies yet. This is the Geographic Practice Cost Index. So here's a thrombolysis of an embolism. If you stick a catheter inside somebody's lung, and you turn on TPA and you turn on ultrasound, and you start to lysis that clot, that blood clot, so the patient can breathe again, you're going to bill 37211. This is thrombolysis of an embolism. Medicare has determined that the work RVUs to do that procedure is 7.75. And you go, 7.75 what? And I go, it's unitless, remember? There's no unit. It's 7.75 relative value units. Well, let's compare it to heart transplant. Well, maybe heart transplant is 49 RVUs. Way more difficult, takes way more time. Remember, the difficulty is taken into account. How much time is a surgeon hunched over as they do the surgery? Their back hurts, their neck hurts. You know, all of that is taken into account in the work RVUs. So to get rid of a pulmonary embolism, Medicare is going to pay 7.75 work RVUs, 1.4 practice expense RVUs, and 2.1 malpractice expense RVUs. Now in Provo, Utah, to run a practice in Provo, Utah is totally different than Midtown Manhattan. The real estate's cheaper, the labor's cheaper, everything's cheaper. So look at the work. The work gypsy for Provo, Utah is 1. Well, guess what? It's 1 in Austin, Texas, and Austin is 10 times the size of Provo. Provo only has about 150,000 citizens. Austin has like 1.3 million or something like that. So the population doesn't really matter. It's a measure of how expensive and all that kind of stuff it is to do the work in that particular location. Practice expense is below the national number of 1, and malpractice is way below. Now watch. This equation is this equation up top. You take the work RVUs times the gypsy work. You take the practice expense RVUs times the practice expense gypsy, and the malpractice RVUs times the malpractice gypsy, times by the conversion factor for this year, and you get $370.79. So I color coded it as best I could. 7.75 times 1 is this one, plus this. You're going to get $370 in Provo, Utah for doing a 37211. Now, if you do that same procedure in Brooklyn, if you do that same procedure in Fargo or in Anchorage, Anchorage has the highest gypsy in the nation, by the way. Alaska, because the practice expense is so much higher in Alaska than anywhere else, for a myriad reasons, that would go up. You're gonna make $370 if you did this procedure in Provo. You may make $375 if you did it in Manhattan, or you might make $390. I don't know. We'd have to go change the gypsies for New York City to find out what that payment would be. So let's say right here, Dr. Hauser, now look, I've got 3 arrows up here. We're gonna put the whole story together. Dr. Hauser wants to make $300,000 each year, and all of his revenue comes from 1 code. Now that's ridiculous because physicians bill 30 different codes a day as they go from one visit to the next. But let's, for the sake of simplicity, it's all from 1 code. In 2022, he's gonna bill an office visit, that code 9213, an office visit of 20 to 29 minutes. So the work RVU for that code is 1.3, 1.26 practice expense, 0.1 malpractice for a total of 2.66 RVUs. 2.66 times that is $92 for each visit of 20 to 29 minutes. So when you go to the doctor's office and you sit on that table with paper on it and the clock starts ticking for 20, and the physician walks in right then, which they never do. Pretend the doctor walks in the room right now. If that visit is between 20 and 29 minutes long, the physician gets to bill 99213. And they will get this year $92.05. Now look at my little footnote down there, assuming a gypsy of 1. So this is just national average, right? I'm not saying Provo or Austin, Texas or Miami or anything. So Dr. Hauser has to bill 3,200 visits to make 300 grand this year. Well, here's some real numbers. These again, all of these are real numbers. In 2023, Medicare has proposed to increase the practice expense by 0.2 of a relative value unit for 99213. So Dr. Hauser goes, wow, this is awesome. I'm going to get, it's a little easier for me to pay my practice expense, which increases the total RVUs by the same amount. But the conversion factor got cut by $1.53. Remember that slide 3 slides ago? It said it got a 4.2% cut, meaning $1.53. The difference between 34.606 to 33.0775 is $1.50. That means he is going to have to do 125 more visits next year to make the same amount as he made this year. And if he doesn't change his behavior, he's going to make $11,000 less next year than he made this year. So $1.53 is a lot. If you take 300,000 divided by 33.077, it's about 8,000 RVUs he has to bill every year. Well, at $1.53 cut on each one of those 8,000 RVUs, he's going to lose out on $11,090 next year if he doesn't increase his production. That's a funny word, right? If his production of treating patients on tables with paper. So what could happen is the CFO comes down the hallway and says, I don't know how we're going to get more patients in this hospital. So here's what we're going to do. You are not allowed to see patients for 29 minutes. You are only allowed to see them for 20 minutes. New company policy, new hospital policy, no more 29-minute visits. You can only do 20-minute visits because the RVUs just got cut by $1.53. You guys don't know what RVUs are. I do. Cut the visit. We don't have the time. We're going to lose money. So here's what it looks like in history. This is an office. You remember this? These numbers from previous slide. I'm going to assume the RVUs for doing an office visit were the same from 2015 to 2022. And I've added 2023 in there because Medicare just released those numbers. But And I'm going to assume a gypsy of 1. So the work gypsy, the practice expense gypsy, and the malpractice expense gypsy are all 1. So I'm not assuming Provo or anywhere else. The payment for an office visit in 2015 was $95. Next year, it's going to be 88. Here's what that looks like. In 2015, a provider had to bill 3,100 times to make 300 grand. They'll have to bill 3,400 times next year. They'll have to work 8.5% harder. And I'm not accounting for inflation. Now, I'm accounting for inflation in the conversion factor because remember GDP and all those things are accounted for in the conversion factor, but I'm talking garden variety inflation. I mean, how much it costs them to go, physicians have to eat too, you know, how much McDonald's has gone up for them and how much a head of lettuce and how much, you know, oil change for their car is. Just to make the same amount in 2023 that they made in 2025, they have to work 8.5% harder. So here's another way of looking at it. In all those years, the doctor says, I just want to make 300 grand a year. That's a good salary. I'm happy with that amount. That's really good. The conversion factor this year is 34.6062. They would have to bill 8,669 RVUs, make 300 grand. If they do not change their productivity, it's going to be 3,361 times 8,600 to make 291 grand next year. So let's go down here to 2026. If it keeps getting cut by $1, it's a hypothetical, right? If the conversion factor gets cut by $1 every year, because the United States is in recession, we are right now. We've had 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. So in 2023, when they release the new conversion factor for 2024, I'm not a betting man, but I'm confident that the conversion factor will be cut for 2024. And it may be cut by more than $1 because now we're in recession. And I don't think that the inflation in medical costs is offsetting the cut in GDP. So that one number, the UAF that creates the conversion factor, I don't think that's going to go. I think it's going to go down. So if the conversion factor goes down $1 a year, and the doctor continues to do 8,669 RVUs, they're going to end up making $265,324 in a couple of years. So if the physician wakes up in the morning, takes a shower, puts on their suit, drives to the clinic, visit, goes to lunch, visit, and then they wash their hands and get in their car and drive home, and they keep doing this, and this is their routine because they've been practicing medicine for 25 years and they're in a routine, they're going to make less and less money every year, to tune of 8.5% year over year, continue diminished revenue. These are my last 2 slides. This was this week, September 6th, was that Tuesday? Physicians CMS to boost 2023 conversion factor, expand certain health services. MAGMA urged Congress to provide a positive update to the Medicare conversion for 2023 and all future years. Well, I don't know who's running MAGMA, but the problem is, far be it from me to give Medicare any credit, but I'm going to give them credit. They don't just make up this number. Each one of those numbers that create the conversion factor, because remember, conversion factor this year equals conversion factor last year times all of these things that take into account GDP and all of that. If America continues to be less and less and less productive, which we are, the jobs number came out this week, 280,000 jobs or something was added, but our productivity numbers are decreasing. Employees are being less and less and less productive. Similarly, our trade deficit is increasing. We're importing more than we're exporting. So that UAF number that creates the conversion factor is going down. So to my dear friends at MAGMA, Medicare can't just wave a wand and say, okay, legislative change will increase that, because Nancy Pelosi and all of them haven't given more money to Medicare. So that legislative change number stays the same. Budget neutrality is not going to change anytime soon. They're going to stay budget neutral for a long time. If you take from here, you got to give from here. So MAGMA, I like your enthusiasm to say, we want you to provide a positive update to Medicare conversion factor 2023 and all future years. Well, Medicare can't do that. Medicare has to rely on what the US Treasury says GDP happened last quarter. So next month, Joe, the next GDP numbers come out. They were negative in Q1, they were negative in Q2. If they're negative in Q3, that UAF number that's part of the conversion factor, I can almost guarantee you is going to cut the conversion factor for 2024. And one more slide and I'm done. Dr. Ratliff, a neurosurgeon at Stanford, is tired of the way Medicare programs keep paying physicians less and less. Physicians are facing a planned 8% cut in Medicare reimbursements. That's not the conversion factor. That's an average of all the cuts. In 2023 would be on top of a 2.75 cut second half of this year. Quote, this constant cutting of Medicare rates has been going on for years and they make it hard for practices to make meals right. That's just office visits. Look at the graph. So Dr. Joe Hage, I run into Joe on the street and I say, Joe, how you doing, old friend? And Joe says, Nick, I don't know. I love practicing medicine, but it's just getting harder and harder and harder every year. And I say, Joe, why do you think that is? I mean, I'm just an average guy. I work at Costco. You know, I don't know anything about healthcare. Why is it getting harder every year? I hear this all the time. And Joe says, I don't know. My patients won't do what I tell them to. COVID was really hard. You know, it's hard seeing COVID patients pass away. I don't know. I'm just bummed out. And I go, now, Nic Anderson, the health economist, would hear that and go, I know why you're bummed out, Dr. Hage. You're bummed out because the conversion factor keeps going down by 50 cents every year. I bet you would be willing to tolerate non-compliant patients, non-adherent patients. I think you would be I think you would be able to tolerate all of those negative things you just told me here in the parking lot if the conversion factor was going up by $1 every single year. You'd be like, yeah, my patients never do what I tell them to. They all go home and drink a 2-liter bottle of Coke and smoke a pack of cigarettes. But hey, I'm making $10,000 more every year. In fact, I'll show you right here. If the conversion factor went up by $1, you would make $8,669 more dollars every single year, right? It's $1 per RVU. Notice the difference between 300,291 is this, 869. So Dr. Joe Hage, yeah, I know you're bummed, but I think that your bummed outness would be offset if the conversion factor was going up every year. I think you'd be like, yeah, I don't know. My patients never do what I tell them to. And, you know, I'm sick of working with insurance companies and they're always denying coverage for my stuff. But hey, I made 300,000 last year. I'm going to make 350 this year. I'm going to make 400 the next year, 450 the year after that, then 500, then 550. Hey, I'll deal with the headache of insurance. The conversion factor is going up every year. I'm making more money per RVU than I've ever made before. So here's my last couple of conclusions. Physician payments consist of 3 things. RVUs, gypsies may go up and down every year. The biggest contributor to physician payment, I think, is the conversion factor. It changes every single year. You can go Google it, conversion factor 2022, conversion factor 2023. When it cut, providers have to work more to make the same amount of money. The end. So, yes. So that one number, that one conversion factor number, let alone changes in RVUs, Joe, if those relative value units for doing a tonsillectomy go down a little bit and the conversion factor goes down a little bit, the physician on New Year's Eve goes, I am exhausted. That was a long year, but it frankly wasn't any different than any other year except for during the pandemic. But you know, I went to work at 9 a.m. and I came home at 6 p.m. every day like I always do. But I don't know, man, I am beat. I can't buy the new car I've wanted to buy. We had to take a more meager vacation than we normally take. I don't know what it is. Well, it's this funny little number no one knows about. That's tucked back in the Code of Federal Regulations called the conversion factor that takes into account macroeconomic changes like GDP and inflation. And the doctor at the end of the year goes, I don't know how much money I made. It's hard to tell until my accountant tells me in April, but it's New Year's Eve and I think I made $280,000 this year. Last year, I'm pretty sure I made 300,000. And yet I work the same amount of time. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of my patients. I'm sick of health insurance companies. I'm just tired of this. And you go, it's that one number, man. I really think that conversion factor is what's bumming you out.
I know that there's a flood of thought among us listening. We all have something to say about this, so I'm not going to monopolize the time with what Joe Hage thinks, except to say you continue to be one of the most delightful humans I know.
Thank you, Joe.
And I can't imagine you have a peer on any staff, any company in the country that is as knowledgeable, that dives in the way you do, and makes it understandable so even I can understand it. You are a gift, Nicholas. That's why everyone's like, Nick is so great. It's a little tiring, but that's why they say it.
Thank you.
Eddie Lynn, why don't you go ahead as a doctor and tell him what you shared in the chat?
Oh, well, what I said was when I was practicing medicine, every year Medicare would advance ridiculous proposals that no other profession has to accept. So, I mean, imagine if you go to Walmart and you look at a 75-inch TV and you say, I love that TV, but you know what? I don't have money. I'm going to pay you $100 for it. And then you get to take that TV and go home. But in Medicaid, which is reimbursement for services to the poorest, you get, I mean, when I was practicing, I was getting like 27 cents on the dollar for service to Medicaid patients, which I was willing to do. And every year I literally, donated almost $300,000 worth of billing just for Medicaid patients. But I would hope to make up for some of that in my care to Medicare and private insurance patients. But among the ridiculous proposals that have been floated, some of which were defeated, was that they say to radiologists, how about next year you read the chest x-rays for free? And they'll say to the cardiologists, read the EKGs for free. Yeah. And for anesthesiologists, this was an actual proposal. Any Medicare patient who come back within 30 days will get their next anesthesia for free. You don't get to bill for it. So it had nothing to do with the quality of care. I mean, the patient may come back because the implant got dislocated, they got whatever. It had nothing to do with the anesthesia that was given. But the government says, well, guess what? When that happens, you don't get reimbursed.
Yeah, it's called a global period. The global period can be 30 days or 90 days. And Ed, you know what's amazing with this too? I'm not saying I agree with what I'm about to say. I'm just saying this is what it is. The nation was founded essentially in 1776. Between 1776 and 1976, it took 200 years for the nation to have $1 trillion in circulation. It was 200 years to the year, exactly 200 years for M2 to reach $1 trillion. Medicare's budget this year is $1.5 trillion. $1.5 trillion to run Medicare. And remember, Medicare is only for 65 and older and end-stage renal disease and Medicaid. So Medicaid, not even really, because that's adjudicated on the state level, but it's different. I'm not an expert in that part, but Medicare's budget's $1.5 trillion. And then they there's nitpicking over 0.5 RVUs or this much of a conversion factor change. We spend 50% more in Medicare every year than the nation had in money in 1976. I mean, these are staggering numbers. And if those numbers continue to grow, what if Medicare's budget goes to 1.6 trillion, 1.8, 2.9, keeps going like that? Do physicians end up saying, you know what, I'm going to cut back on this procedure. I'm only going to do the high RVU procedures. I'm just not going to go into primary care. If I was really a slippery 22-year-old, going into medical school, what would be really interesting is to go download a sheet of all of the RVUs. You can go Google OPPS. It's the Outpatient Prospective Payment System for Medicare, Addendum B, download it, and you can see all the RVUs for every single procedure. And then you can see how much they all pay and go, okay, I'm about to start medical school in August. Those pay the most. I'm going to go into, whatever, orthopedics exactly. Or, whatever. And there's the most buffer there or something, but.
So that medical student, in that case, if they were to follow your advice, they would be down with OPPS.
Do you know what's funny? On Two Truths and a Lie, I said, I've memorized all the words to OPP. That was my lie. I know a lot of them.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you, Joe. I'm glad you knew that.
Nick, as someone married to an orthopedic surgeon, I can tell you that 30-day period isn't doing them any favors, and that the reimbursement is going down on that end too. My husband does joint replacements, which was one of the early areas where people focused on that 30-day. You bounce back all care before and all the 30 days afterwards, no additional costs. And my husband does revisions, which means that inherently he's taking on more complex patients, doesn't get reimbursed hardly anymore, takes longer, and they're already almost guaranteed to be significantly more likely to bounce back. So
Yeah, and if that patient has aseptic loosening from that joint placement being put in, that's not Dr. Jana's problem. Yeah, like he didn't do that. That was, the patient's been smoking for 25 years. They have avascular necrosis all over their entire body. He puts a new joint in them. It fails at 29 days, and Medicare says, Dr. Jana, it's your problem. No, it's your problem. This patient belongs to you. Remember all of other Nic Anderson's lectures that the patient belongs to the health insurance company? This is your crappy member that's been smoking for 1,000 years, and they don't have adequate blood flow to perfuse the joint that I put in them. You have to pay me again.
So Nic, let me ask you a question, because I see Verna asked it earlier in the chat about, is this a show? That's okay. It's just driving movement towards value-based care practices. As a physician, I ran as far away from the health economics of all of it as I could, right? I was pediatrics, primary care, kids, patients. But when I did a short little project for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation looking on health systems transformation, and I got to talk to a lot of people in healthcare financing, jotted a whole lot of notes to look up later what the hell they were even talking about. But from my simplified understanding of value-based payments, what I sort of reasoned to myself was that, for example, the orthopedic surgeons being early in that, like, let's see how this all works, we're getting caught up in a major health systems transformation, like the shift towards wellness and prevention away from acute and chronic disease management, which means a shift away from billing for procedures and rewarding people. It's when you're dealing with an individual patient at a certain set time, you know, in terms of like my husband who's sleeping over here because he had a case canceled, but you know, when he has a patient, it's extremely frustrating. You can see the effects, but on the whole, how do you see this trying to move a system away from reimbursing people for procedures when wellness and prevention in the whole is much more cost effective?
Last week,
value-based payments.
Last week, I joined this conference call with Joe, and I had been up all night long because I was on an advisory board with Roche in Barcelona. And so I got on the meeting at 2 a.m. I got done at 7 a.m. And then this meeting with Joe starts at 9 a.m. So I had been up all night long, and there was another health economist in this call. And there's a NT Pro BNP test that you can give heart failure patients that as their heart begins to fail, NT Pro goes up. And Roche has just done this clinical trial and they wanted my opinion on it. So I gave my opinion. The other health economist, there was only one other in the room, and he's all for value-based care for exactly this reason, where Aetna says, we'll give you, hospital, $5 million to treat these 200 patients. That's all you get. So you better treat them well, or we're never going to do this again, and so on and so forth. And he thinks that fee-for-service came out of the depths of hell, you know, that fee-for-service is the worst thing in the world. And I see it totally differently. But it's funny, Laura, because I'll cut to the punchline without getting into the details. I don't disagree with value-based care. I just think there's an easier way to do it rather than just this lump sum of money, which will never be enough. And it will always never be enough, in the same way that $33 per RVU is never going to be enough, and on and on and on. That I think there's nothing wrong with fee for service. I get fee for service from Comcast. I get fee for service at Taco Bell. I get fee for service when I get my oil changed. I get fee for service everywhere. Healthcare, since the beginning of time, ancient Egypt was fee for service. You treat me, I give you a bag of money, and here you go, and that's that. Fee for service isn't the problem. The problem is that the physician doesn't, the problem is, let me rephrase this, the third party payer. Now, I'm not saying health insurance companies, I'm saying the paradigm of third party payers. So if I tell Laura and her husband, you two, I love you, you know, you were friends with Jonas Salk, how cool is that? You know, that I want you and your husband to go to dinner at Sundance tonight, it's on me. What is Laura and Dr. Laura's husband, doctor, too many doctors, that what is their incentive when they get to the tree room? You're going to order 7 bottles of wine. This is the incentive, not the motivation. I'm separating incentives from motives. 10 bottles of wine, the most expensive steak you can get, 6 desserts, and 6 more desserts. In the United States, the physician's incentive.
Can't hear you.
Incentive, physician's incentive.
Nope, still don't hear you. Oh, and it was getting good too, Nic.
I know, we all want to know the punchline.
Oh, shoot. Can you
There
hear
you
me?
go. We hear those shoes.
The Physicians Association was making sure to silence him there.
The physician's incentive
The
is
physician equivalent of anonymous.
order.
Just struck, Nic.
Yeah.
he over orders.
In the United States, the incentive for a physician is to treat maximally. When the physician works for the health insurance company, which is every physician's like, I do not want that. I would rather die than work for Aetna because Aetna's the bad guy, is to treat optimally. This is why single payer healthcare systems work. It's not because there's only one payer, and it's not because the government runs it. It's because in the UK, the physician works for the NHS. So it is value-based care. The NHS gives the orthopedic unit of the NHS $25 billion a year. I'm making up the numbers. And the orthopedic group that is in the UK says, guys, we have $25 billion. Let's do an advertisement telling people to exercise more and to treat their joints well and all these things so that they don't come here. That's the total opposite of the United States. In the United States, the physician has the incentive, again, not the motive. I'm not saying physicians are evil, the physician in the United States has the incentive to say, please go smoke 10 packs of cigarettes a day and do anything you can to come back so I can bill your insurance company. So fee for value is what we need. Not fee for service, but fee for service isn't the problem. The problem is that the physician acts as an insurance company money extractor. It's the exact same economic reason why tuition is going up in the United States. Physician, professor, hospital, university, patient, student, health insurance, student loan. It's the third party payer problem. If I told Joe and Beth, go to dinner, it's on me, Joe and Beth are going to go.
No, they wouldn't. They'd be like, Nikki, you're about to have twins.
Oh, you're the benevolent, you're the benevolent.
Beth and
no,
I
I'm just
not.
kidding.
We might
the
go
incentive,
to the diner.
The incentive is there. The incentive is for you to be like, screw Aetna. I hate those guys. They're the worst. Aetna's the worst payer in America. They never pay anything, or Cigna or Blue Cross or whoever you hate. I'm going to stick it to these guys. When a Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi patient shows up in my office, I'm going to lick my chops. I'm going to bill every imaginable CPT code I possibly can because daddy's got a new beach house he's got to pay for. Because what do I care about Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi? They're a bunch of jerks.
Nikki, do doctors have a lobby?
Magma, that one that I mentioned in that.
That's a lobby?
Yeah,
because I'm thinking that, it's voters that get people in office. And if we are to believe what I believe, money trumps everything. I hate that verb now, unfortunately. Money makes the world go around, and people are motivated by it and its power. I think the average American's like, oh, really, poor doctor? What is it? You earn 280? Only 250 this year? Oh, only 200 this year? You're going to be okay?
So Laura Jana graduates from college. She takes the MCAT. She goes to medical school.
I understand her perspective. And it's like, well, you have to keep in mind how much I gave up and what I sacrificed, how much it costs to run. We don't know this.
Sure.
All we know is that I just heard that I work 2 jobs and I make 45 last year. She has one job. People come to her office. She puts them on a piece of paper. She says, and she made fucking 160,000 last year.
Yeah.
That's a problem? No, I think I need a break. And so I just don't see, that's a pretty big problem for Magma to overcome.
So when Laura graduates med school, goes to residency for 4 years, finishes residency, I would prefer that she goes and gets a job at the Aetna hospital, where she treats Aetna members and she gets a $500,000 salary. And then she goes, I do not want patients coming back. So I'm going to treat optimally. I'm not going to use too many devices on them, and I'm not going to use too few. I'm going to treat optimally. Because if I keep my patients from coming back, I get a $100,000 bonus at the end of the year from the CFO. Now, Laura graduates residency and goes and gets a job at St. Mark's Hospital and goes, I need these patients coming because I can't get RVUs any other way. Now, again, Laura, thank you for being a good sport, but I'm not talking about motives. I'm talking about incentives,
Nick, I'm right there with you. And one of my big takeaways, remembering that I was not particularly interested in diving deep into healthcare financing until I had to, and trying to understand it, you seem to be describing my impression of value-based payments. You're just talking about who's doing it, like who's implementing it, but the idea that the incentives have to shift. Again, no evil motives, but it's just the way we function. The incentives have to shift. But what I don't yet hear is how do we shift away from a procedural reimbursement when our priorities are shifting? How do we
So
pay for mental health services when there's no procedures for them?
there's no
Epigenetic, social determinants of health, all those things.
Yep.
That don't see how the system shifts in its current mode for financing purposes.
It won't. As long as physicians and hospitals are insurance company money extractors, the incentive, the motive, everything is to suck money while you can get, while the getting's good. When that patient shows up, it's Christmas morning. That's 10 grand. I'm so sorry you got in a car accident and you're a single mom. I believe me, but it's $10,000 for my hospital. So Laura, what has to happen is that the physician has to work for the health insurance company. Then there is no CPT code. Who are you billing? When the patient shows in and they're bleeding out of their neck and they show you their card and it says, I'm an Aetna member, and you go, come on in, come on in. They sew you up, they do surgery on your neck, they let you stay there for 2 or 3 days, make sure you're fine, and then they send you home. There's no bill. Who do they bill? I paid you my premium, $1,000 a month. There's no payment mechanism. The patient pays $1,000 a month to Aetna. They get to go to any one of 500 Aetna hospitals across the United States. If they go to Cigna Hospital, then Cigna goes, sweet. We love it when these little Aetna, punks come here because I'm going to bill Aetna for all their money, But if an Aetna patient gets a laceration on their neck, the ambulance shows up and they go, Aetna, take me to Aetna, And you go to an Aetna hospital and they roll out a red carpet for you, and they go, I don't want to say it's all on the house, but it is because I paid my premium. I get to use any piece of equipment at the gym when I go to the gym at which I'm a member. This gym right here, I don't have to pay separately for each piece of equipment. I show up at the gym and they go, Nick, thank you for your $500 payment. It's yours. Right now, they would say, oh, he touched that piece of machinery, bill his gym insurance company.
Nick, you would not be happy with my gym because this summer I walked through the gym to the pool to swim laps, and they said, oh, there's an extra fee if you walk through to the pool. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I paid my membership already.
Friends, Mark has joined us on camera. I've not been able to welcome him on camera for a long time. Mark, please reintroduce yourself to the group. And I invited you a dozen times this call alone to become a panelist, and it was like, good. He had a question, so now I got it.
Well, Nick and I have actually had some correspondence just on this topic, and I really appreciated Nick's insight. But it is the third payer problem, and we are the cause. And there's a real disconnect also between the insurance company, and the kicker is it's an employer-based system, which employers are not good purchasers. They have no interest in getting an optimal deal for their employees. They have an interest, but they have no mechanisms or incentives to do that. So it has another layer of dysfunction that we need to address, and it's critical.
So I can't solve all of the healthcare problem. I think if I can solve 80% of it, that's a huge improvement. And that 80% is realized by nothing other than Aetna buying up 100 hospitals, hiring their own doctors, and treating their own members according to their own medical policies. That solves 80% of the problem. Then we'll work on employer-based, and we'll work on these other 20%,
Well,
30, whatever it is.
If you recall my letter that we discussed,
Yes.
it was that we make all of those employer-based payments for healthcare taxable income.
Yeah.
Because that's a loophole that's in the system that doesn't provide that incentive to actually address those costs.
Yeah.
And once we do that, you will find eventually that the system will change.
Yeah.
There's a historic, excuse me, there's a
Please,
historic.
before you do, Mark, my question goes unanswered. Remind the folks at home what you do.
Okay, I'm a business development guy with some experience in medical devices. I've been helping companies come into the US with innovative technologies, and lots of them come from Scandinavia because they've been innovative. And so that's my main role. I am also working in business development for QRX Partners, who is helping companies, especially early stage companies, get their QMS and their regulatory affairs in order. And so this is where I'm at right now. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for that, Eddie. And I also, Dr. Carr, how has this talk been for you in terms of what you've taken away? Does it affect the way you're going to market with your device, or?
Well, as a pharmacist in practice, when I was practicing, we were never reimbursed for our clinical consultation, but I think that's starting to change. As a medical device company, I don't know how it's going to affect, I don't think it'll affect me, but it will affect Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement. And my question is Medicaid and Medicare the same reimbursement, or are they different?
So the CMS is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So what they change affects everything. Now, where the money comes from and how it flows to the state of Florida and then goes to Florida Medicaid physicians, I'm not an expert on that, but I know that when Medicare, and furthermore, these changes, Sue, these affect commercial insurance because commercial insurance often benchmarks off of whatever Medicare does. So Aetna will look at this conversion factor and they should say, what do I care what the Medicare conversion factor is? We have our own conversion factor, but they don't. They benchmark off that.
Hey,
And I
Nick,
know
go ahead, Sue.
I know that
Go
my
ahead, Sue.
health insurance has incentives for being healthy, and they've got these once a week programs, and if you attend them or lose 5 pounds, you get little bonuses, and they give you a credit card and you can spend it. So they give you cash back for being healthy. And I think that's the way that the trend, what I've seen trended with Aetna and the others as well. When I was in hospital pharmacy, my Aetna plan, we had to, answer questions and try to get healthier. So I think it's going that way. There's just that hurdle that you have to get over.
Kevin, real quick, Sue, you've nailed exactly what I've said, I think in the lecture, Kevin, you came to in San Diego. Does Progressive, Progressive car insurance, they have that little thing that you like plug in, and they have some clever name for it or whatever. Progressive wants you driving 25 miles an hour, 10 and 2, sitting up straight with a seatbelt on, looking in all directions and being a very good driver. What does Martin's Collision Repair Service on State Street in Orem, Utah want? They want you to drink a fifth of vodka, hold your phone out, drive like this, because they want you to wreck your car. Now, again, that's motivation. I shouldn't say that. They have the incentive for you to behave that way because then they get to bill your insurance company for fixing your car. So the health insurance company is always the demonized one in State of the Union addresses and by physicians and hospitals and everybody, and by us, the patients, because we have no relationship with them. You have no relationship with Aetna. When was the last time you went to Aetna's building and had a conversation with the medical director? Never. And yet they're the ones with the incentive for the patient to be healthy. The physician, on the other hand, has the incentive, not the motivation, has the incentive for the patient to eat, drink, and be merry so that they break their leg and come to the hospital and they get to bill 45 RVUs and buy a new Mercedes. That's the problem. The problem is that the physician has the incentive to get money from health insurance companies. If they were the health insurance company, they would have the incentive to keep you out. If instead of wrecking your car and taking it to Martin's, you took it to Geico Collision Repair, that's a different game. So
I was thinking about your presentation yesterday, Nick, as I was booking my my colonoscopy and looking at the expected cost on the United Healthcare website of roughly around $2,800.
yeah.
So
can I make one? I forgot to mention this, Joe. Sorry.
Get the Cologuard.
Yeah. No, don't get Cologuard. I hate Cologuard. Sue, no. The Cologuard incentivizes patients to not get a colonoscopy and wait till they have cancer because the sensitivity for adenomas is only 17%. So real quick, take a hospital in the Hamptons versus a hospital in the Bronx. There's always going to be some intrepid reporter at the Wall Street Journal that's 22 years old. They just graduated from Columbia School of Journalism, and they discover that the hospital in the Hamptons gets reimbursed $500 for doing something, and the one in the Bronx, where minorities live and where the income is really low and it's terrible, they only get reimbursed $100. And it's this outrage. And the Wall Street Journal publishes this article on it, and everybody goes, "Oh, shame, shame, shame." The Hamptons always gets more money. And you go, well, remember the gypsy? The gypsy determines that, well, it's $10,000 a month to rent 2 square feet in the Hamptons. It's a lot cheaper to rent that same square footage in the Bronx. That adjusts the payment. It's not out and out discrimination. It's an equation that you run a hospital in the Hamptons, it's $100 million a year. You run a hospital in the Bronx, it's $20 million a year. So when you read these stories about, you know, here's Fifth Avenue in New York, and this hospital does a colonoscopy for 2,000 and this one does it for 1,000. Well, they might be in different zip codes. And those zip codes, the rich people live over here and the poor people live over here. It's not, and then there could be a bad selection bias where poor patients end up going to the lower reimbursed one. Well, yeah, but then their co-insurance is less for essentially the same colonoscopy Kevin's going to get. So the higher reimbursement on this side of Fifth Avenue may not correlate with an improvement in outcomes. It's just going to save poor people money to go to the cheaper one across the street because they have to pay copay. So the gypsy plays into this, where these procedures are happening. New York versus, you know, Springville, Utah, plays into how much Kevin's colonoscopy is going to be. And he may do just as well to go to the cheaper, crappier one, because a colonoscopy is a colonoscopy. I shouldn't say crappy. Did you say that?
I was going to expand on Nick's, no, real quick, but you know, Nick, part of this is also consumer behavior though. So going to your analogy before between higher education and medicine, on both sides, people are in the market thinking they need to pay for stuff that's got nothing to do with the actual service they're there for. So with I just wrote 2 very large tuition checks this week for my kids. Do they really need the $100 million student center with the climbing wall and, you know, the professional athlete level, you know, gym and everything else? And, you know, for the hospitals around here, do you need patient rooms that are equivalent of a 4-star hotel?
Totally.
Friends, it has been longer than I can remember, months and months and months since we've had an 80-minute long meeting. It just goes to credit you, Nick, how you light our imaginations. You tell us stuff we didn't know, and well, that you might be long-winded. But the point here is, thank you again. Next week is the day after 10X London, and I'll give you an update about what you missed. Eddie will be there, Luke will be there, and Dr. Philip Lowe is our keynote. This is the 10th anniversary of his Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness. It's just a 2-page manifesto that has been hailed the world over, and the inspiration for films and the like. We might actually have a filmmaker there who made an entire documentary on cows because of what she came to understand as the way a cow thinks and how it processes thought, and that they're not just a, forgive me, piece of meat. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you next week, the same bat time. And
thank you, everyone.
Again, Nikki, thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great 10X show.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.